911 emergency.
Hi, I live in Laguna Beach. There's a house, I don't know the street address, that is sliding down into a canyon.
I started hearing a lot of cracking and popping.
When I realized the noise was coming from all around the house, I knew the house was probably falling, sliding.
We saw the landing and the stairs separate, and the stairs started coming down. And at that point, we just started running.
It was all happening so fast. Water lines bursting, power lines crackling, falling around you. I was going to do everything I could to get my kids out of there.
In those few minutes where I didn't know, I can only describe it as the most shocking moment of my life.
From the Weather Channel, this is Storm Stories with meteorologist Jim Cantore.
January 2005. Southern California is experiencing its second wettest rainy season on record. The torrential downpours trigger a series of landslides, including the deadly La Conchita mudslide near Santa Barbara that left 10 people dead. After 3 months, the rains come to an end. By late spring, communities along the coast that escaped the devastation believe the threat of danger is at last behind them. One of those communities is the city of Laguna Beach. Located 50 miles south of Los Angeles, this town of more than 24,000 people is set against a steep hillside overlooking the Pacific Ocean. But beneath the homes and driveways of Laguna's Bluebird Canyon, trouble is brewing. Due to the heavy rains, water has seeped between the layers of rock and clay sediment that make up the hillside. The slopes have become dangerously unstable. Wednesday, June 1st, 6:30 a.m. 14-year-old Haley Stevens wakes up later than usual and begins her morning routine.
I was supposed to get up around 6, but I didn't get up till 6:30. And I still had my pajamas on, so I was kind of lagging in my room, just trying to get fired up for school.
Her 10-year-old brother Luke is already up and eating breakfast in the kitchen. Their mother, Diane, is away at a business meeting in San Francisco. That leaves their father, John, on kitchen duty.
Normally Diane does the breakfast and the lunches, but I was doing them that day.
On the other side of the house, Haley is getting ready for school when she notices some unusual sounds.
I started hearing a lot of cracking and popping.
Having lived in this house her entire life, she's used to hearing some noises.
My parents had always told me since I was little, whenever it rains or the weather changes a lot, that kind of thing, our house always makes a little bit of noise just because it's on a hill.
But the sounds this morning are unlike any Haley has ever heard before.
It sounded like we were getting shot down, by a machine gun or something. And it started getting louder and more intense. So then I ran out to the kitchen and started talking to my dad.
Haley came out and said, Dad, what's that noise?
We stopped for a second to hear if it was in the kitchen, and we started hearing it, and he's like, oh, it's just rain.
Then said, no, that's hail, because it got increasingly louder.
But when John and Haley look out the window, the sun is shining. Then, John looks down at the floor.
The floor was starting to separate, and travertine tile in our landing was starting to buckle and crack.
John, who works for a general contractor, now recognizes what is happening. The hillside is starting to give way.
Everything was compressing in the house. It was the timbers and 2x4s that were cracking. Immediately thought what we needed to do was get out of the house.
John and Haley rush to check the front door while Luke waits for instructions.
I was hearing a little popping. I didn't see the cracks. I didn't know what was happening.
Went to open up the front door and couldn't get it open. Grabbed it again and put both feet up by the handle and pulled as hard as I could.
As the floor beneath them continues to separate, panic sets in.
I was standing right behind my dad when he was trying to get the door open, and I was definitely nervous.
2 doors down from the Stevens home, 39-year-old Jill Lockhart has been awakened by the same cracking sounds.
I thought maybe it was my neighbor doing something below his house. But then I heard it coming from the other side by the baby's room, and I knew immediately something was going wrong.
Jill's husband Bobby works for a surfboard company. He had left the house earlier that morning for a meeting in San Diego. Jill is home alone with their 2 toddlers.
I think the scariest part was when I realized that the noise was coming from all around the house, and then I knew the house was probably sliding. All I could think of was, I got to get the kids and we got to get out of here.
Jill races down the hall to where her youngest son, 2-year-old Tyson, is sleeping.
I grabbed the baby and threw him over my shoulders and ran up the stairs.
Jill hurries to gather her 3-year-old boy, Trey.
I swung open the door, trying to hear if the noise was still coming, hoping it would stop, but it was getting louder and louder. So I screamed for Trey to get up, that the house was falling. I remember running out the door saying, we'll be safe on the street. It's fine, it's just the house. We'll be safe once we get on the street.
But once they step outside, Jill realizes it's not as safe as she had hoped. The pavement feels as though it's sliding beneath her feet.
I couldn't figure out where the movement was coming from, but it felt like we were all going down.
Back at the Stevens house, John has been struggling with his front door.
Finally just exploded off of the jam and swung inside.
John and his children, Haley and Luke, run out onto the street where other residents, including Jill Lockhart and her 2 boys, begin to gather. They all watch in horror as one after another houses twist and snap, ripping apart gas and power lines.
We were all just kind of screaming because power lines were breaking. And our house, we saw it just buckle and split in half right before our eyes. We started freaking out because we knew that the gas was still on and who knows what's exposed.
The street was chaotic and nobody knew really what was going on except that the hill was sliding. I asked John Stevens, a neighbor, what's going on? Is it an earthquake?
He said, I believe it's a landslide, but I'm not absolutely sure.
I was like, oh my God, are you kidding me?
Just then, a pickup truck appears, driving in reverse toward the small group. It's another neighbor, Steve Howard. He waves for the group, now numbering 8 in all, to get in. They jump on board.
It was like a scene from Jurassic Park. We were backing up, and you could see the road just split in half. And we dropped like 70 feet.
And at that point, I just lost it, and I was just beside myself. I didn't know what was going on, and I just started to freak out.
Their way now blocked, the families leap out of the truck and try to figure out a new plan.
It was all happening so fast. I was thinking seriously about heading up the slope.
Going uphill and moving out of the direct path of debris flow is exactly what experts recommend during a landslide. But Jill Lockhart feels strongly that down is the best way out.
Experts say never run down from a landslide. I don't know how many experts actually lived in a landslide because you just have to get out of there.
Jill leads a small group down the hill, including her 2 young boys. John Stevens and the others stay behind.
The scary part about it is when we were running down, I saw the homes coming down behind them, and I thought to myself, oh my God, are we going to be the only ones that live? Are these guys going to die up here?
911 emergency.
Hi, I live in Laguna Beach.
Yes.
There's a house on Flamingo. I don't know the street address. They're sliding.
Okay. Where's it sliding from?
It is on the street up above, and it's sliding down into a canyon.
By 7 a.m., word of the landslide has spread. Soon, news helicopters are hovering above. Friends and relatives hearing the reports begin making frantic phone calls, wondering if their loved ones are safe. 2 of the residents who answer are away from home at the time of the slide. They receive the calls on their cell phones.
I must have had 15 to 20 phone calls within the first 10 minutes.
When I got that call in San Francisco, I didn't know if they were alive. I didn't know really the extent of the damage. I just knew that it was bad.
June 1st, 2005, Laguna Beach, California. A 30-acre section of mountain is broken away and is sliding down Bluebird Canyon. The landslide takes more than a dozen homes with it, and terrified residents are running for their lives. John Stevens and his 2 children, Haley and Luke, are trapped more than 100 feet up the hillside, trying desperately to escape the destruction all around them.
You're not really fully aware of what's happening, and the first things come to mind is basically what's the safest thing to do, and how do we get away from the situation? You go into survival mode.
More than 400 miles away in San Francisco, John's wife Diane is on a business trip. She notices multiple calls have come in on her cell phone and excuses herself from a meeting to check her messages.
I didn't really use my cell phone that much. It was mainly to keep track of my kids. So for me to get 10 to 15 calls in the morning was really unusual.
On her way out the door, the phone rings again.
It's a friend of mine, Debbie, who was crying and asking me if I was okay and if my family was okay. And I said, "What are you talking about?" And she went on to talk about the landslide. What came to mind was 6 months before this, there had been a landslide up towards Santa Barbara, and 10 people had died. You're forced for a few minutes to sit and think about what if nobody's alive, or what if just, what if one person perished and the rest are, how would you put your family back together?
At the same time, another Laguna resident, Bobby Lockhart, is on his way to San Diego for work. He set out early that morning, leaving his wife Jill and their 2 young sons at home. At 7:30 a.m., just as he arrives in San Diego, Bobby's cell phone rings.
It was one of our neighbors just crying frantically on the phone. Your house slid, and then it broke up. And then from there, it was just frantic call one after another. Your house had slid, the canyon had slid.
Bobby immediately calls Jill on her cell phone. There's no answer.
And it was just, a heart started pounding at that point. I just turned around and drove 90 on the freeway. Every thought going through your mind.
Back in Laguna, Bobby's wife, Jill Lockhart, their 2 sons, and several other residents have begun racing down the collapsing hillside. The slide has caused streets to buckle, exposing deep ravines below.
It wasn't like a house sliding. It was the mountain collapsing. The mountain fell.
As Jill makes her way down, she notices other residents fleeing up.
Seeing my neighbors running up, I just didn't know if I was making the right decision or if they were, you just don't know.
Still, Jill and her group push on, avoiding rising manholes, splintering wood, and broken glass.
As we were running down, our neighbor's yellow garage was detaching. It was like coming behind us. So I was just running for my life to get down.
We were winning. Tyson, me, and then Mommy, but not Daddy.
The force of the hill coming down, I felt like it could have wiped this whole canyon out. That's how strong it felt.
After running nearly half a mile down the crumbling hillside, Jill's group reaches the bottom of the canyon.
When I was running down, I heard all the popping and the snapping. But as soon as I got to the bottom, that stopped. So I felt like we were in a kind of a safe place down here.
Once on solid ground, Jill brings Trey and Tyson to a friend's house. There, she finally makes contact with her husband Bobby, who is still on the road, driving back to Laguna Beach.
At that point when I got to her voice on the phone was just amazing.
I told him the kids were okay and we were out alive, but, our whole life was up there.
For John, Haley, and Luke Stevens, the danger is far from over. Still high up on the hillside, they notice that the land above them is now starting to give way.
We tried to figure, should we go down or up? Because it was like falling, like everything was falling. So we started running down.
None of us had any shoes or socks on. So that kind of added to the problem.
Haley is the first to start climbing down the hill.
The
I hopped over the fence and I took the first step and I hit a cactus. And then I took another step and I hit another cactus. And then I took the third step just knowing that there was nothing I could do about it, right into another cactus.
Though both of her feet are full of thorns, Haley pushes on. Her father and brother are close behind.
We were either traversing over the concrete or running alongside of it, trying to avoid the water, the gas smell, and the down power lines. Eventually went on down this long drive and got to a fence, which we then jumped and got to more stable ground. And everyone made it. We were the last ones down.
Back in San Francisco, John's wife, Diane Stevens, still has no word about her family.
Those few minutes where I didn't know, which a few minutes in real time, but an eternity in an emotional state like that.
Unable to reach her husband, Diane finally gets her parents on the phone.
I knew that my husband would have gotten a hold of them. So they had just talked to him, and they were at the hospital. Once I knew my family was safe, whatever else happened, I knew that we can deal with it.
Diane quickly gathers her things and catches the next flight home. For Bobby Lockhart, his 2-hour ride home feels endless. It's shortly after 9 a.m. when he finally arrives in Laguna Beach. The scene is chaotic.
It wasn't just like our house slid. It wasn't just our street slid. It was the entire hillside slid. Just a huge area of devastation. Obviously, it was going to be a long day.
And an even longer day for police and rescue workers.
We heard stories of people that there was people trapped in homes and animals were trapped in homes, and we immediately went into rescue mode. There was people in the surrounding areas with the landslide. We had to get them out.
June 1st, 2005, Laguna Beach, California. A massive landslide has sent more than a dozen homes cascading down the slopes of Bluebird Canyon. The Laguna Beach Police and Fire Departments are on the scene, evacuating the area and checking for survivors. Detective Joe Torres is the city's emergency management coordinator.
This road is so narrow. It was pretty hectic trying to evacuate everybody, because literally every single house had to be evacuated.
After almost 10 hours of house-to-house searches, more than 1,000 Bluebird Canyon residents are moved out of the area. Miraculously, there are no deaths, but 17 families lose their homes.
If you could imagine what that would be like, having to raise a family and then lose your house. You know, your whole life is displaced.
In the weeks that follow, Detective Torres and other relief workers help victims pull their lives from the rubble and put them back together.
My job went from being a police detective just to being a liaison for these people. Everything from helping them find a place to live, making sure that they had food and water, clothing. My whole life was living for these people.
For the Stevens family, it takes months to get their lives back on track. They move several times between friends and family before finally securing a temporary trailer in town. Despite what they've gone through, the Stevens are hoping to someday rebuild on the mountain.
Plan for now is to ultimately try to build. And quite honestly, I think it's going to be some of the most stable land in this area.
Many experts do agree that rebuilding the hillside from the bedrock up will result in more stable conditions. Yet Jill and Bobby Lockhart are unsure whether they will ever move back to the area.
We had just reinforced our hill, put up retaining walls. You think about those things when you buy on a hillside, but you don't expect the whole hill to collapse.
We're going to live here for a couple more days and then new house. If the hill breaks again, then I'm not going to live there.
Washing machine and dryer, all the kids' play stuff, it's all here.
With nearly everything they own in storage, the event has caused both the Lockharts and the Stevens to reprioritize their lives.
We're just living with what we need. You know, you need your family and a few necessities, and that's about it.
The whole slide has definitely made me kind of know what's important, I guess you would say, in life. More so than I ever did.
How can you protect yourself during a landslide? The answer when Storm Stories returns. How can you protect yourself during a landslide? Recognize the warning signs. Listen for a rumbling or snapping sound. Doors or windows stick. New cracks appear in plastered tile or the foundation. Distance yourself from the direct path of the debris flow. If you should remain at home, move to a second story, if possible. If outdoors, run to the nearest high ground in a direction away from the path of the landslide. If escape is not possible, curl into a tight ball and protect your head. For Storm Stories, I'm meteorologist Jim Cantori. Your local forecast is next.